Imagine if you showed up to work tomorrow and you found out that your boss was cutting your pay by up to 40%. That's basically what Patreon is about to do to some of its creators. Hi, I'm Luke Hart, and usually I make videos about tabletop role-playing games. But today we're talking about something that threatens the livelihood of some of the content creators that you know and love. Folks like Shepeku, who make TTRPG battle maps, or my friend Luke, also known as Limithron, who created the Pirate Borg RPG. So what exactly is Patreon about to do that could very well be an existential threat, at least from a business perspective, for some creators? Well, it all starts with Apple. You may not be aware of this, but in March 2024, the US Justice Department, along with 16 other state and district attorneys general, filed a civil antitrust lawsuit against Apple for monopolization or attempted monopolization of smartphone markets. In June 2024, the attorneys general of Indiana, Massachusetts, Nevada, and Washington joined the civil lawsuit. Unrelated to Apple and Patreon, but of great importance, did you know that recently a US judge found that Google has an illegal monopoly on search? Furthermore, the FTC is currently going after Amazon on antitrust monopoly grounds. It would seem there is an alarming trend of companies becoming incredibly large and incredibly powerful. But why is this a problem? The basic problem with monopolies is that they force competitors out of the space. And then once they've achieved that and have dominance over a certain sector, they can do almost anything they want. They could double their prices to customers and you would have no choice but to pay because, nobody offers that product or service. Or they could strong-arm other companies who want to use their services to pay exorbitant fees. And that brings us back around to Patreon and Apple. Did you know that Apple has a 30% App Store fee? Basically, that means if you create an app and want to have it listed on the iOS App Store, you need to give up 30% of your revenue upfront before expenses. And since June 2024, iPhones have had a nearly 60% market share of smartphone users in the US and over a 20% global market share. Now, the 30% fee isn't exactly an absolute because, as we'll discuss a bit later, companies such as Spotify have discovered a workaround to this insanely high fee. Now, I'm just a simple YouTuber, but I'm left to wonder, what stops Apple from increasing that fee to 40% or 50% or 75%? Frankly, I don't know. I would hope that someone, likely the government, could and would step in, but what if they don't? What if there is no one? Back to Patreon. They have their own app on the iOS App Store, and beginning in November 2024, Apple is requiring Patreon to switch to their iOS in-app purchase system or risk being removed from the App Store. In response, Patreon is being forced, yes, those are air quotes right there, and there's a big asterisk next to forced that we'll discuss in just a moment, to make the following changes to their platform. First, if you purchase anything through the iOS Patreon app, you'll be paying 43% more. It's either that or your favorite creator takes a 30% haircut on earnings. And let's not forget that creators already get far less than what you as a patron give them. Remember that Patreon has an 8 to 12% platform fee, and there is a 2.5% payment processing fee. So if creators are also bearing the burden of Apple's iOS fee, that means nearly 50% of what you give to your favorite creator is lost to middlemen. That's rather nuts, don't you think? But it gets worse, much worse. You see, the second thing that Patreon claims they're being forced to do, yes, air quotes again, is change how you are allowed to support creators on Patreon. Right now, there are 3 ways to support your favorite creators. First, you can pay a per creation fee. This is when you pay every time a creator makes a thing, say a map or an adventure or a new song or whatever it is that they make for their patrons. If they make 3 things in a given month, you pay for 3 things. If they make just 1, you pay for just 1. And if they make 0 things, you pay for 0 things. Furthermore, you can put a cap on what you pay per month. Those are some amazing benefits of pay per creation. Second, you can pay on the first of the month every month. That means if you join on August 14th, you don't pay until September 1st. Creators also have the option of charging 1 month up front. Some do this, some don't. Third, you can pay using subscription billing. This is when you pay immediately when you sign up to support a creator, and then on the same day every month. However, Patreon is saying that in order to comply with Apple's iOS App Store requirements, they'll need to eliminate pay-per-creation and first-of-the-month billing. They say they must move to subscription billing for everyone. So why is this bad? First of all, it limits your options as patrons. It stops you from choosing how you want to support your favorite creators. Second, it jeopardizes the livelihood of some creators, specifically creators who use the pay-per-creation option, such as my friend Luke at Limathron or Chipeku. If they're forced to change to subscription billing, they could see their revenue significantly decrease. Now, it's hard to really say how much. Some folks in the creator community I'm in are estimating 30 to 40%. Others have mentioned a figure of 58%. But there are lots of variables and we can't really say for sure. However, we do know that any pay-per-content creator who releases content at least 3 times per month will absolutely lose a ton of revenue, while others will suffer a non-trivial loss in patronage. The bottom line is that revenue loss will be large, but it's hard to say exactly how large. Guess what happens when you're running a business and your revenue decreases by that much over the short term? Well, I'll tell you what happens, because not only do I run a business myself, but it's also kind of common sense. You probably go out of business. Businesses can often adjust to declining revenue, but losing significant revenue that quickly is usually catastrophic. And this brings us back around to our air quotes about how Patreon is supposedly being forced to do this. You see, I don't believe that's actually true. You see, Patreon has been attempting to transition all creators to subscription billing for a couple years now, and honestly, I think this situation with Apple might be creating the perfect excuse they need to force it upon us. Look at how Spotify responded to Apple's insistence of a 30% App Store fee. They said no. Spotify stood up for their customers. Spotify stood up for you. Patreon could make their iOS app read-only, just like Spotify and other companies have done. For instance, if you go to Spotify on the iOS app, it redirects you to subscribe via a browser. To boil it down, Spotify and other companies have figured out ways to be listed on the iOS app, but not pay Apple's crazy 30% fee. Couldn't Patreon do something similar? Patreon could also allow individual creators to opt out of being shown in the iOS app, or they could automatically exclude pay-per-content creators from being visible on the app. And we know this is possible. Patreon has quite a bit of not safe for work content on their platform, something that Apple does not allow in their iOS store. So what does Patreon do? They hide NSFW accounts from showing up. So the technical capability exists, we know it does. So why can't Patreon do the same for pay-per-content creators? Which brings us to ask the question, why has Patreon gone nuclear, so to speak, instead of exercising an option that supports both creators and those who wish to support them? Why doesn't Patreon stand up more for you and the creators you love? Why doesn't Patreon join the US Justice Department and the 20 co-plaintiffs in the Apple antitrust lawsuit in standing up to bullies? That's a good question, and I'm not sure I know the answer. It probably has to do with money. And it probably has to do with why Patreon has been mysteriously trying to push everyone to subscription billing for a while now. It's also worth pointing out that despite Patreon saying that they have the creators' best interests at heart, not a single creator that we're aware of has asked for any of these changes. Even a simple vote where Patreon asks creators if we'd rather keep current subscription options versus staying on Apple's iOS would have indicated they wanted our input and wished to understand how this change could affect our businesses. Instead, everything has been very dictatorial, with changes being decided internally and then creators being informed after the fact. So, what can you do to help? First and foremost, do not cancel your Patreon subscriptions as a way to stick it to Patreon. Remember, creators still need your support, and many of us depend on Patreon for our livelihoods. Instead, this is what you should do. First, email Patreon. Tell them that you don't support this change. Tell them that you want to decide how best to support your favorite creators. Tell them that you're not okay with creators' livelihoods being jeopardized. And finally, tell them that it's not okay to capitulate to a bully and give them what they want, even one as powerful and intimidating as Apple. Doing that only encourages a bully further. Next, make a fuss on social media. Twitter or X, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, whatever social media are your jam. Talk about it. Make noise. Third, if you're currently using the iOS Patreon app, you can just delete it. Patreon is consistently hammering home how the app is the most used platform for engagement, and that is why they're making these changes. Showing them that patrons are willing to boycott the app sends the message that you care more about supporting your favorite creator than the method by which you interact with their content or community. Remember, continuing to use the iOS Patreon app is probably going to cost you up to nearly 45% more anyway. Finally, ask other content creators, journalists, etc. to cover this issue. Reach out to larger platforms and more legitimate news sources. Remember, Patreon is supported by venture capital, and the investors need to see how Patreon isn't doing right by their creators and those who support them. These are the real people in charge. I left Patreon's email address down below, along with links to articles that talk about this issue. It's time to take a stand. It's time to support our wonderful creators. Thank you.